Hello, today is Wednesday, March 21st. I'm your host, Kevin Lim. I'm one of the co-founders of the Center for Progressive Urban Politics. I'm doing this podcast remotely. I'm spending some time in the Bay Area. And today we have a fantastic interview lined up with you. And that is with Dr. Shiva Ayyadurai. And he is running for Senate as an independent in the state of Massachusetts. So here's my interview with Dr. Ayyadurai. Here at the Center for Progressive Urban Politics, we believe that by putting aside divisive labels such as Democrat versus Republican and asking what is the most prudent course of action based on common sense, tradition, and moderation, we can make a difference in our communities, big and small. This is why I'm really excited to be here today with Dr. Shiva Ayyadurai, who is an independent candidate for Senator of Massachusetts. And he's going to be running against Elizabeth Warren, who was the darling of the progressives when she was campaigning initially. Dr. Ayyadurai holds 4 degrees from MIT in the biotech field, and he started several companies in that space as well. Dr. Ayyadurai was born in India and immigrated to the US as a child. And what makes this unusual, he was born into one of the lower castes of Indian society. And during our interview, I want to delve more into that, as I think it will be a learning opportunity for many Americans. So without any further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Ayyadurai.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
Well, real pleasure to have you here. And may I call you Shiva?
Sure, you can call me Shiva. No problem.
Wonderful. Well, to get things going, when you look at your resume, I got to ask, were you considered a child prodigy?
You know, some people have used that term, but I just consider myself somebody who just worked hard and believed I was very fortunate to be able to have come to this country. And I always, you know, anything I've done, I've always enjoyed what I did. Even as a kid, I was always tinkering around, be it playing baseball or whatever I did. I always enjoyed what I did. So, and I applied myself. I was very dedicated to anything I did.
Wow. Now, there's a wonderful anecdote in your life about you were age 14, 1978, when usually you'd find it would be an IBM Selectric on the desktop in any business, but you had designed an email program for a healthcare enterprise. Is that correct?
Yeah, in fact, I invented the first email system. You see, so if you understand, when I was 14, I was very fortunate to have had the opportunity to go to NYU into this very special computer science program. It was an intensive program where we learned 7 programming languages. After that, you know, I still had my high school left, but I didn't really have a lot of math courses left, or for that matter, science. So I started working full-time at what is now known as Rutgers Medical School in the heart of Newark, New Jersey, you know, pretty much primarily African-American, but in that university, which was at that time a small college, as you said, you know, there were lots of offices, and the way offices communicated in those days was through 2 modes. One was the phone, the landline phone. The other was called the inter-office mail system. And at the heart of that, as you said, was a typewriter and a secretary and a desktop. And on that desktop was an inbox, an outbox. Behind the secretary's desk was these things called file folders, actual folders, you know, metal folders. Underneath her desk was a trash can. And on top of her desk was things called paper clips, carbon paper. I mean, this was the way that people constructed the, what was called the memo, or the memo. And
you know, when you look at that, you look at information technology, you know, there was a time when papyrus was high information technology.
Yeah.
Back at this time, and how things have changed and very rapidly.
Yeah, so when you look at that way of people communicate in offices, the medium for collaboration was the memo. So if you were hiring someone, you would write a cover letter, which had a very specific format, to, from, subject. If you wanted to let others also see the resume and be part of the conversation, you would put what was called a carbon copy, CC. Right. And you would attach, basically when you did the memo, you would have to put another piece of carbon paper and another piece of white paper and type away. If you had to do 10 CCs, you'd be typing for a while. And then you'd attach the resume, which is called an attachment, and you'd put it in these envelopes with a string on it. And then that envelope got put into pneumatic tubes and sent around the office. And that's how collaboration took place. So now you got to understand, this is 1978. There were computers, mainframe computers. You could do this simple thing called messaging. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the actual conversion of that entire system to the electronic form, which had not been done before. In fact, other computer scientists who were more looking at the technical aspects of electronic messaging thought that was an impossible feat. But, I was trying to solve an office problem, and that's what I did, converted that entire system, 50,000 lines of code, wrote it, tested it, held seminars for it, and I called that system email, a term never used before in the English language, essentially defining email as we know today. And a few years later, I was awarded the first US copyright at a time when copyright was the only way to protect that kind of intellectual property. So, I was recognized as the inventor of email, forgot about it because I was really interested in medicine. But yeah, I invented the first email system.
Wow, fantastic. Well, what I want to do, because our time is short today, jump right into my Q&A. And what I want to do is talk about your platform, the various planks of your platform that you're running on. Shiva, there are roughly 1.2 trillion in student loan debt out there. What innovations can we make to our tertiary education system that would make the pursuit of learning more effective as well as less expensive?
I think it's a good transition from the email story. You see, the invention of email actually tells us a lot about where education and innovation really comes from. You see, my public school system is what really gave me a lot of fundamentals, and my family, frankly. It was family, dedicated public school teachers. I have to tell you, I learned very little, frankly, at MIT. I learned more in my public school systems. And I got to be very honest about that. MIT really got a very smart guy, and they gave me the MIT brand. And that's what most of these institutions do. Through the selection process, they're already getting sort of the creme de la creme, right? And then they put a brand on them. But in my public
years ago, someone said, "Well, our public school education system really exists only to cast a very wide net to find the talent, not necessarily."
The 70s were the heyday of still dedicated teachers before, the Department of Education destroyed education in this country in many ways. My chemistry teacher, Mr. Walker, is still alive. I think won one of the best teaching awards in the country. He held 3 jobs. Think about this. He was a teacher, he was a contractor, and he was a carpenter. But he was, I learned so much that I still hold today, or from my algebra teachers, et cetera. And then I got actual mentorship and apprenticeship training from, NYU, where they had where a visionary professor said, let's bring some high school students in. And then from Dr. Michelson in a state university where I got to work. So I got to tell you, I was already a seasoned programmer long before I came to MIT. I remember sitting in on my first MIT computer science class. I thought it was a joke. So what I'm trying to say is that education really comes from fundamentals and actually skills training. I was a skilled software engineer long before I came to MIT. And so my view of education, I went on to get those degrees, but during those 4 degrees, I was always in and out of MIT, starting companies. I decided to get those degrees because I was very cognizant, for a person of color, for a person of my background, that if I wanted to participate in larger dialogue, people would always look at my credentials. So I went and got those more as weapons. But I got to tell you that I was trained, I was making money while at MIT, during MIT, from the training I got from Newark, New Jersey, and my high school system. And that's just a fact. So my view on education is pretty simple. That we don't need to go to the educational industrial complex. What we need is to make sure people are getting fundamentals, which can only occur, in my view, in early stages and formative periods in the public school systems. Second, we have to recognize that you have to allow choice. Everyone learns at different levels, and not allowing choice in education is the wrong thing. The second piece of it is we need to really focus on what I call skills-based education. Right? Are you actually learning a skill? Right now, what we have is we have a collusion between the predatory student loan companies and big universities. Universities keep cranking up their salaries.
Right.
Do a massive marketing campaign to convince parents you got to send your kid to college, otherwise he's worthless or he or she's worthless. And so parents are a captive consumer audience. They get the student gets accepted to a college. The student loan, which is unfortunate, it's even called the student loan because it never.
It's really a form of indentured servitude almost.
Yeah, the loan, the money goes right to the university, so they get free money, and the student is signing papers and can never go bankrupt. Now think about it. If I take a loan from a bank or you do as a small business person, they always ask our pro forma, what's the projection, and then the bank makes a prudent decision because they know if they invest in you or I, that if we go bankrupt, they're going to lose their money. But the student loan companies do not have that control mechanism. So they're giving out student loans. They know that these students will, as you say, go into indentured servitude. If particularly they're not in a quote unquote business, which means an educational process that they have no skills. So if you're studying the anthropology of aardvarks or something, that's still being funded, but you may never go anywhere with it. And the student loan companies are essentially in a racket with these, educational institutions. By the way, many of the private ones are essentially large-scale hedge funds like Harvard. Harvard is fundamentally a $40 billion Wall Street hedge fund, which has one end called a university. So this whole thing has become a massive industrial complex to essentially not do education, but to make money and grow these endowments, which essentially pay off the hedge fund managers. Last year, Harvard, for example, paid $58 million, I believe, to 6 or 9 guys who run their hedge fund. So that's what's really going on. So we don't really have education anymore. We don't have skills training. That's why, for example, Massachusetts, for every 17 skilled high-tech job openings, only 1 person is skilled. Think about that. So you have jobs, you have resources, but people are not being trained because of this complete delusion that people have been put under. You have to go to this big university, and basically it's a complete racket that's taking place. So I think, first of all, it starts with family and parents recognizing that your kids need to get skills. And the other part of that is we need mentoring programs and apprenticeships. That's where you really learn. You don't really learn a lot, frankly, by going to a university.
Interesting. Switching topics, again, since we don't have a lot of time. In a couple of days, on March 23rd, midnight, Congress is going to have to pass a budget. And again, what we're looking at are deep cuts to social programs, increase in budgets for defense spending, are just 2 examples of what's going on in this budget. What does this budget that is about to be passed, what does that say about our American values and our priorities?
Look, we got to understand, I think one of the words that I like to use is the word scale. The entire governmental system, which is really run by the establishment, for the establishment, by what I call the collusion of Republicans and Democrats. 70% of Americans now believe in this concept of a deep state. And it's frankly true, right? It's a military industrial academic complex. It's all the laws and everything they pass are really intended for big pharma, big hospitals, big defense contractors, right? It's not about at the scale of where real innovation takes place, where real growth takes place, which is in fundamentally local economies. Look, I invented email, not at MIT, and this is where the controversy comes in. It occurred in Newark, New Jersey. Now, had the ecosystem been in there of lawyers and the local community banks, I would be a gazillionaire now, and also where the policy set up. But that, and TV was invented in Franklin, Idaho, in a small farm. So the reality is real innovation, real growth occurs locally. And what we've done is we have bamboozled through the media, through advertising, that the notion, the narrative, false narrative, that all great things occurs in the big environment. It's absolutely false. Big agriculture, Monsanto, look what they've done. Big pharma is a disease, look what they've done. Real innovation, real growth, real human health and sustenance occurs, I'm convinced, at the local level, in communities. So I'm a believer that these budgets, they have nothing to do with that, right? They're all about scaling at the gigantic level, right? So 20% of the GDP right now is for healthcare. Well, where is that money going? Everyone wants, you have two sides. Bernie Sanders talks about single payer, and the other people say, we need to support big pharma. Both of these guys got it wrong. The bottom line is small is beautiful. What we've created is big pharma, big hospitals, big insurance, and they are all motivated to give the costs high. Because
right. It seems like it's always this, either it's profligacy or penury when it comes to the budget. Something's going to get
so they've created this.
starved.
Yeah, they've created this ridiculous dialectic, and it's in that dialectic that they have all of us debating, when it's a completely a bogus model. When you really look at, for example, healthcare, which is a big part of the budget, right? It's bigger than defense. The biggest part of that budget is healthcare. And the way we really, for example, drop the cost of healthcare is to recognize two things which relates to education. We don't have enough family practitioners anymore. We don't. We need to eliminate the need for a doctor to go to 4 years university. After high school, you should be able to go right to medical school. And then you lower the burden on most of these doctors right away. The second piece of this is we need to drastically bring down the cost of drugs. And that a lot of that takes place in collusion, because there are things called group purchasing organizations, and we can talk more about that. But the reality is a $2 generic drug is being sold for $32,000. So the level of collusion that takes place is never addressed. Bernie Sanders never addresses this. Elizabeth Warren never addresses this, because they like big. Both of these people like big. They want centralization of power, because at a fundamental level, the Republicans and Democrats, both of them believe that they know better. Elizabeth Warren fundamentally believes she knows better, that everyone else is stupid. And my view is that individuals know better. Everyday people are every day solving all sorts of problems. And we need to fundamentally believe in the concept of decentralization, bring things back to the local community levels. We need to support local community banks. We need to support the local public libraries, the local post office, and the local public schools, because that is literally the hub of where innovation can take place. And I'll talk more about that in a program that's really central to our entire program. We call it Local Revolution.
Oh, interesting. Okay, well, let's move on. Looking at your platforms, you seem to be, one of your platforms is campaign finance reform in the form of term limits. We're probably going to disagree here. I believe in publicly funded campaigns. I lived in California for 20 years and we used to call it politics by U-Haul. As someone would get termed out of their Senate career, they would run for the assembly into the Senate, or find a city or town council to run for. They would just be U-Hauling all over the state to find a district or jurisdiction.
Wow.
Now, could you explain to me why you settled on term limits?
Well, look, the fundamentals of this is that participating in government was meant to be a service. The founders never put term limits in because they never thought anyone would want to be a career politician, right? These people actually had jobs. Washington was so happy to go back to his farm and be a surveyor and a farmer.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Right? These people did it in a very deep way out of a nobility for service. So the notion of being a career politician was never in their minds. They probably thought it was mindless why someone would want to do that for the rest of their lives. So we have to put that in context. What we've now created is a crony model of people who participate in politics, because many of them cannot do math. They don't have any skills. They can't probably understand a balance sheet. They probably can't fix things. They've never created anything.
It's interesting. I heard an anecdote recently where a fellow was with a number of folks that fund political campaigns. It was some meeting of some PAC. And he, in an offhanded kind of way, said, you pay all this money to these politicians, would you pay them to run your companies? And they all started laughing. And he said, if I would ask that 30 years ago, it would have been a very different response. So it kind of goes with what you're saying.
Yeah, so I'm saying, let's go to the fundamentals of what kind of society we want to create. We want to create a society by the people, for the people. That means by the people, for the people means the local electrician, the local plumber actually does a lot of work, the inventor, the scientist, people who do work for a living, they actually have a lot of tacit knowledge that they don't need political consultants. They don't need to do reams and reams and reams of political research on, because they know this stuff like the back of their hand. They participate and they go back to work. That's the foundation of this. The racket that's been created to have basically a lot of idiots who are participating in politics, and they are idiots. I think people should talk about, what skills they really have, because I bet you they have very little. So that is what we've created, and we need to eliminate that. So my goal is to handcuff these guys, so you basically make it untenable for them to participate in politics. Term limits. You know what? You participate in any government at any level for 2 terms, that's it. So you can't build your little mafioso clan, start at the local level, your state level, and rise up. We need to end that piece. Next thing is, I actually would probably support public funding of campaigns, or serious limits, in the sense that I call it sort of $1 one vote model, meaning if the total number of registered votes in a federal election, let's say in Massachusetts, 4.3 million registered voters, you should be able to spend only $4.3 million from all sources, everything. Because the reality is, what we do now is, through the vehicle of advertising, you can make people make irrational decisions, right?
Absolutely. I mean, people, they emote, and we think we don't, but we do.
Yeah, advertisers have figured out, they spend billions and billions of dollars to figure out how to manipulate human psychology, right? So to make irrational decisions, a lot of the stuff people buy, a lot of the decisions they make, they don't even need, but through the power of advertising, which is a very powerful biological way, or psychobiological way of manipulating people, that's how this runs. And it's not that different in elections. These guys wait until September. During September to November, in those 6 weeks, they take tens of millions of dollars worth of TV advertising to manipulate people. And so if you constrain that, now people have to focus on, do you really have a message? Do you really have a product? Which means, do you really have something that's tangible? If you need that much money, it's likely you don't have a message, right? So you have to look at these external issues. So we need to cut that down. The other piece is, what's wrong with having voter IDs? This is not a left or right issue. So those are the 3 things I think we need to do. We need to, number one, impose term limits. We need to seriously constrain how much people can spend on any of this. Like, there's an actual number cap, period. And
well, it's interesting. Arizona had publicly funded campaigns, and a number of years ago, I spoke with Mary Lou Stanley, who was really the force that got it passed. And I said, well, I was interviewing. She goes, well, we were a little deceptive. I go, well, what do you mean? She goes, well, we called it clean money, but it was really publicly funded campaigns. Like, well, I think they'll forgive you that, Mary Lou. But what was great about it, at its height, before it was gutted by the Supreme Court, 80% of Arizona's elected were clean money. And that's of their assembly and their House and their Senate. And then almost all but 2 of the statewide offices were clean money candidates. And as one fellow said to me, he said, the great thing was, the insurance lobbyists came in, they said their piece and left, and I wasn't beholden to them. They weren't paying for my campaign. Mm-hmm. It just shows you the impact of money. And
well, I also think media companies should be treated like PACs in the current model also.
True. Because I never thought of that, but boy, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, they get to endorse a candidate, and think about how many politicians, through a couple of degrees of freedom, have complete control of certain media companies, right? Or in collusion with them. Mm-hmm. So the entire thing is completely undemocratic. So that's why, that's why I call the clean government piece of our campaign. And I think my intention is, by winning in Massachusetts, because Massachusetts is fundamentally a state of independence, 2.3 million independents, nearly 60% of the voters here are independents, that you basically inspire people to say, I'm going to participate and I'm going to go back to work. And part of this is, I'm relatively insignificant in this puzzle, but hopefully it'll inspire a different kind of movement. And I think Massachusetts may be a great place to do it.
Why so many percentage-wise independents in Massachusetts, do you think? And is that what drove you to run as an independent versus a Republican?
Well, so here's the deal, right? I have never voted until the past election. I don't know if you know that. I've been a citizen.
No, I didn't know that.
Because in 1984, I was always a student of politics, having grown up always a political activist since a kid, because I grew up in India of a caste system, was moved to understand why there was this caste system, why there was injustice in the world. And when I came to MIT in 81 and 84, if you remember, Jesse Jackson ran against Walter Mondale and Reagan. And he ran on this thing called the Rainbow Campaign, if you remember. And what's interesting about that was a number of us who were, into sort of anti-establishment politics, we were moved by it. But at the last minute, if you remember, he gives all of his votes to Mondale. So that's when I had an awakening that there were really three dynamics in politics: the establishment, and then the real change agents, which were everyday people on the street, political movements. And then there was a third, more insidious part, the not so obvious establishment. And so in the past election, Hillary Clinton was clearly the establishment. In fact, she was so clear, all the Bushes and the Romneys and the Clintons all came to her aid, if you think about it, right?
Well, it's interesting. I was going to ask you a question about the deep state, but you had already answered that. And then I was going to talk about Hillary Clinton, how well connected she is to the military-industrial complex.
Oh, yeah. I mean, and so is Elizabeth Warren, by the way.
I was going to ask you about that, too. And my question to you would be, when Elizabeth Warren won, had I been her first election to Senate, had I lived in Massachusetts, I would have absolutely not only voted for her, but campaigned for her. Yeah, but how is it that a progressive can move then to be in support of an obvious neoliberal corporatist like Hillary Clinton? But
see, the lesson I learned as an 18-year-old kid, I think many Americans also need to learn, and that's this. For far too long, American politics has been Tweedledee and Tweedledum. So you have the establishment, which has two heads to it: the overt establishment and then the not so obvious establishment. And then there are actual people's movements. Change has always come about. Susan B. Anthony was laughed out of the Democratic majority House, right? They thought she was crazy. She went to the streets. The civil rights movement wasn't Lyndon B. Johnson or Martin Luther King, right? It was people's names we do not know, right? And when you look at political dynamics, the establishment exists, which is two heads, and then you have movements. And and you can see it over and over again. So Hillary Clinton was a clear establishment. Donald Trump, whether people like it or not, was reflecting a movement of people who felt that they were disenfranchised. And in between that was a not so obvious establishment of Bernie Sanders. A lot of my friends said, Shiva, why don't you vote for Bernie? I said, look, he's going to do exactly what Jesse Jackson did. He's part of the not so obvious establishment. And the not so obvious establishment is very clever. They use the rhetoric of revolution, change. They're going to fight for the small guy.
Well, I'll tell you, I was really disappointed, for instance, after Massachusetts, and then later in Arizona, California, when you look at what was done. I mean, that was a primary stolen from him, and why he sat there at the convention and allowed her to accept that nomination without fighting it, I was really befuddled.
He's part of the not so obvious establishment. This is a recurrent process that people need to understand. Otherwise, they keep getting bamboozled. I had a friend of mine. She said, I'm going to vote for Bernie. You should vote for him. I said, look, Bernie's going to sell you out. She hung up the phone on me, was angry as hell. Well, that's exactly what he did. You have to understand, you have to look at it like physics. There are these three motions, dynamics. There are three gears in play. And, in India, same thing. And you can look at it. The British colonialism was the establishment in the 1920s. There was a huge revolutionary movement of people to get rid of the British forcibly, which would have been a good revolution. India never had one. And then they flew in Gandhi, literally parachuted him in. He's part of the not so obvious establishment. And he perpetuated the caste system. He perpetuated Indian corruption through the Indian overlords. White men with crowns left India, and you had brown men with white hats take over. And this is how clever the deep state is. It's got its two levers that they use to stop independent movements. And if you can understand that dynamic, you can always see through the nonsense. Elizabeth Warren is the face of the deep state. She is part of the not so obvious establishment. Look at her record. She supported Dodd-Frank, which really emboldened big banks, destroyed Community Bank. She supported Romney Care and Obamacare, which emboldened big pharma. And on top of it, she's the one who wrote a letter to Chuck Hagel after the military said they weren't going to take certain weapons and said they should be accepted. You see, that's what these people are. And what's really disgusting about people like Elizabeth Warren or Bernie, it's easy to see people like Hillary, for example, right? Or the so-called right wing. But what's really unfortunate is these people, because they're the real racists, they're the real imperialists, and they're the real globalists. Because throughout history, that not so obvious establishment bamboozles the masses. You know, in Russia, Lenin called them the Mensheviks.
Mm-hmm.
You know? They always don't want to really do what's necessary. They didn't really want to overthrow the czar, right? They thought you could ameliorate things because they're part of the establishment. So
right. Somehow they'd be a contingent beneficiary of that next wave of leaders that would come along.
Yeah, and they're the most elitist people, you know, in Boston. I mean, look, our campaign has become the real Indian versus a fake Indian. And it's a very interesting thing. Everyone laughs at it, whether you're not so educated or the most educated, because it hits at a core and fundamental truth that all of these politicians are fake.
Well, let's talk about, we don't have much time left. Let's talk about race. Mm-hmm. Let's talk, recently a good friend of mine, she has...
Can you just give me 1 second?
Sure,
absolutely. I just need to let this...
I'll edit that out, go ahead.
Yeah, hold on. Let me just tell, this is, I got to do this interview. Let me see if I can start it at 4:15. Okay. Yeah, that's what I was going to say, 4:15. Does that work? So can you email me your Skype ID and I'll ping you on it? Or text it to me. Thank you. Bye. So we got 30 minutes. Let me go back. So go ahead. What was the question?
Let's talk about race. Well, a friend of mine, okay, let's talk about race. It certainly captures the headlines anymore. It's how it is being defined now in the press and in the halls of Congress is very different than it was 20, 30 years ago. Recently, a friend of mine, Yvette Carnell, talked about differentiated between race and lineage. And what she was essentially saying is, unfortunately, we tend to look at someone and think race and put them in a bucket, as opposed to looking at what their lineage was, what that meant in terms of their struggles and how they got to where they are today. And I'd like to hear your thoughts. I mean, your family, you are from the Sugar class in India, correct?
Sudra class.
Sudra class.
Well, so Sudra is the lowest, it's the untouchables, right? So first of all, you won't find a lot of Indians like me at all in the United States. You know,
right, they're mostly of the Brahmin class, correct?
Brahmin, yeah, Brahmins or Kshatriya are business folks, right?
Okay.
So look, everyone has a journey. I think what you said, the journey is what matters, all right? And the journey is an interesting one, and I can speak to it personally, but let me define for you what racism is. Racism is not someone calling you the N-word, in my view. You know, I've been called that word, right? Or darky or whatever, right? That's not racism. That's frankly ignorance. What is racism is people who use race to basically support globalism and imperialism and advance their own self-interest. That's racism.
How would you unpack that for
people
who are going to be voting for you? Because it's very complex. What you're talking about now is complex because we've made it so easy. You're a white heterosexual male. You're obviously a member of the patriarchy.
Neoliberals like this. You see, neoliberals and the black bourgeois and the minority bourgeois like this because they don't have to contend with the deeper issues here. The deep issue here is that you have imperialism and imperialism and globalism's two pillars to advance itself is racism and sexism. And I'm not talking about bourgeois sexism or bourgeois racism, okay? That benefits a very small strata, black bourgeois, or a few women who get to become corporate CEOs. I'm talking about the vast majority of people because globalism and imperialism rely on low cost of labor. So they have a whole mechanism through the academic institutions, through a whole process to diminish certain people, right? So you have to say these class of people, whatever they may be, poor whites, or poor blacks, or low caste, whatever they term, are dumb, stupid, they're not qualified. You know, they build a whole narrative, and it's been done, and people have written a lot of literature on this, right? There's been substantive work done on this. But that process is done to lower on the income statement expenses. So that's why you diminish people so you don't have to pay them full wages. That's where this fundamentally comes from. So once we understand that, we understand where this is coming from. So Jay-Z and Oprah, I'm sorry, don't really understand the plight of the vast majority of minorities, right? And
Right, much the same way that most folks didn't understand the Trump victory was based on the wage earning class rebelling against the system.
Yeah, poor whites in this country, Noam Chomsky, one of, my mentors and people I, consider a colleague, many years before Trump got elected, I had been in India on a Fulbright. I'd exposed corruption in India and I got back, and Noam and I were talking about this. And he said, look, if you want to know, because I'd been away for a couple of years, if you want to know what's going on in politics, go listen to right-wing talk show radio. Because what you will see on there is everyday poor, working class white people talking about real issues. And this is Noam Chomsky saying this. Because you see the elite were so convinced that they're so smart and these people were quote unquote rednecks. The reality was the situation of poor whites in this country, their mortality rates are skyrocketing, their depression rates, their use of drugs. And if you look at the numbers going down in other countries, it's escalating here. Those issues were never addressed by the people at Harvard and MIT and Yale because they think they're so smart, or the Hollywood elites that these people are racist. They're not racist. Their issues were never addressed, and Trump hit a dog whistle on that in a righteous way, which in many ways was a necessary disruption to completely attack neoliberalism on the left and the right. So I think all of this is a very, very good event that took place.
Okay,
so
I'm sorry.
As a disruptor, as a revolutionary, I see Trump as someone who's willing to take a battering ram to this. Whatever self-interest he had, to me, it's irrelevant. But he generated a necessary disruption to a system that wasn't really serving the majority of Americans, poor blacks, poor whites, the majority of working people in this country. You look at the income inequality in this country, it has exploded. And primarily because of the concentration, not only of wealth, but what I call the concentration of innovation. This is a very interesting point here. Do you know wherever there's been a concentration of so-called elites innovating, within the radius of that environment is massive inequality.
Interesting.
Right? So, quote unquote, innovation is taking place, but income inequality has also skyrocketed. There's a great paper that just came out in 2017 on this, deep analysis on this. So you go to Kendall Square in MIT, so-called a lot of innovation. I would call it incestuous innovation, right? And around it, the 2 miles away, the black community's average net worth is $8. And God knows what the poor white community is, probably not that different. So that's because all these knowledge workers get sucked in to a small, literally geographic area. The economy rises there, great restaurants, nice apartments for them, right? And everyone suffers. And I would even argue the innovations they come up with aren't frankly that great. These people are self-perpetuating. I mean, Twitter, is that a great innovation?
It's not extending anyone's life.
Exactly.
So it's not lowering the divorce rate.
Right. So what we have done is we have, just like Monsanto and these companies have industrialized farming, right? We are industrializing innovation. And that is, and so what you've done, yes, innovation increases GDP, but I would argue that we haven't even scratched the surface if we distribute innovation like a wild weed all over the world. In Newark, where email was invented, or in Franklin, Idaho, where TV was created. The elites do not want to talk about this. And from a racism standpoint, this is where real racism comes. Look, when my stuff went into the Smithsonian, and I never wanted fame or fortune for the invention of email, the level of abuse I endured was from the so-called elites. And the facts were so obvious. I called it email, wrote the thousands of lines of code, have the first copyright. Where's the controversy? And most of this came from people saying this Curry State Indian should be beaten and hanged, calling me all sorts of names. And I had to file a defamation lawsuit, which I won. But the thing that really bothered them is that this Indian was not willing to go away. You see, I wasn't willing to be a good Indian, shake my head, sit in the lotus position and walk away. Because the elites, a lot of the liberals have created little bounded boxes of how people are supposed to behave. Indians are good for being CEOs of companies, can be software engineers, but they dare not be a great inventor. Walter Isaacson, a big liberal, in the middle of the email controversy, for example, he writes a book He knows this controversy is going on called Innovators of the Digital Revolution. Well, go through the book, all white people. Come on. Are you telling me that no non-white person is, contributed to the digital revolution? And that is a racist. So in my view, Walter Isaacson is a racist. And he has this, aura that he's some great liberal writer. He started the Aspen Institute. Most of the people at the Aspen Institute are racist.
Well, they're looking to invent the best, an electric car that will never catch on for the masses. What the masses need is good, solid, effective public transportation. That's not, Dmitry Orlov called it the iron triangle. You need the car to go to the job that you pay your rent or your mortgage with. And you never really escape the debt and the costs. And they seem to perpetuate these systems that require us to spend and buy more, as opposed to creating a system that just makes everyday life work better for us.
Yeah, look at Amazon and Whole Foods. It's industrialized organic food.
Absolutely.
It's not anything about local farming. It's not local. It's not anything innovative. Basically, and the problem is career politicians in Washington are dumb as doorknobs. They don't even have any idea how dangerous Google and Facebook and Amazon are, because they don't understand technology. We live in a hyper world right now. It's beyond space and time. There's another dimension here. And that dimension completely changes the rules of how you look at intellectual property, how you look at these organizations and the effect they have. So politicians, because they don't know math, physics, science, never have created anything, they have no idea of the dangers of Facebook, Google, or Amazon, because none of these guys understand what logistics are. They don't understand operations research. They don't understand any of these terms even. I do, and others do, like myself, who actually work in the real world and actually have done work for a living. So this was a notion of the founders, that people who actually understand these things should participate in governance and then head back. So now, it's a very awful situation that we've created, where Elizabeth Warren, in my view, is the face of the deep state, because she's the insidious face of it, because she uses the word fight, revolution. I mean, I'd go to her town hall. She didn't even let me come up on stage. You go to them, they're all white people, frankly. I didn't see any dark faces. And the dark faces that do support them, they're the black bourgeois who they hold, that they use to drive votes to the voting polls, right? That's racist. So when I say Elizabeth Warren is a fake Indian, she's also big time racist, because she represents the ultimate pinnacle and the ultimate ruse of the establishment. So that's why, as a person who's gone through the journey, when I was in India, I used to see these politicians bring bags of rice to get people to vote, right? Well, they want to keep people, they don't want to ever let the rat out of the cage. They want to keep feeding the rat in the cage, let it out to vote, and shut the door. That's what Elizabeth Warren and the Democrats do. Now, the Republicans are frankly a little more honest about it. Hey, we're going to come and screw you. The Republicans don't want to discuss racism, and the Democrats use racism to benefit, right? So one doesn't want to acknowledge that there's racism, and the other one uses racism to keep people on the plantation. And so that's why I have a very different perspective on this,
Now, while we're talking about politicians, are there any politicians in the US today who are in office that you admire?
I like people like Rand Paul. There's a guy called Tom Massey, but I like Rand Paul because look, this guy was an ophthalmologist, worked for a living, what I like about him, he looks at things for what they are. It's not about taking a left or right position, liberal or conservative. He's at least headed in that direction, which I like about him. Historically, some of the people that I've liked a lot, there was a great politician in India called Kamraj, who only had an 8th grade education, came from the lower caste, could have become the prime minister of India, but he actually relinquished. He died with one shirt, in a small house. He lived, Malcolm X is another one of my great heroes. Malcolm went through that journey. At the end of that journey, he realized that it's not black or white. It's the oppressor versus the oppressed, the establishment versus the people. And a few months, when he gave that talk, I believe there will ultimately be a clash between the oppressed and those who do the oppressing. He renounced, he did not renounce, he renounced cultural black nationalism, right? And shortly thereafter he was shot. And, Abraham Lincoln, obviously, he had to really look at issues and to solve issues. And that's what engineers do. That's what a plumber does. That's what an electrician does. Politicians don't do that. Lobbyists do not do that. A lawyer makes money by billing, right? They make money on problems, perpetuating problems.
So we've covered a lot today, and I know you have an interview coming up shortly, and our time is limited. For the vote, how would you, let's just say if every independent voted for you, you'd probably win this election, but some will, some won't. How would you be able to reach out to Democrats, people that would be more likely than not to vote for an Elizabeth Warren, and attract them to your campaign? What do you think the most convincing 3 sentences you could say to them would be?
Well, one of the sentences is declare your independence, okay, from this entire nonsense. The other things that our campaign offers and drives to is a notion of a government by the people, for the people, not a government for the establishment, by the establishment. Look, what's interesting is we get in front of people, people say, where have you been? If it's Democrat or Republican or independent, the only people who do not like what we have to say are the hardcore, moral, narcissist Democrats, frankly. The Republicans are actually even more open given all the chaos that's going on. I was just, we're doing this thing called real Indian tea parties, and in India we have chai. Right. And it's not just for Indians. We had one, a lot of Hispanics came, and I spoke, in Spanish as best as I could in Lowell. And these are people who are Democrats, who vote Democrat. They said, you know what, we're going to vote for you because the Democratic Party has not taken care of us. I was in South Boston yesterday, over the weekend. We took our bus, which had real Indian, fake Indian on it. First, the Democrats who were pro-war did not want our bus to come. They're saying that was racist. They're telling a dark-skinned Indian guy that only a real Indian can defeat the fake Indian is racist. It's not about, by the way, that slogan is not about race, it's about integrity. Anyway, we finally got in, 500,000 people, cheers, you can see it. And 500,000 people saw our bus. Okay. And you can see, I'm on Twitter, I'm handing out flyers. People just love our slogan. And these are primarily South Boston whites who you would think are all Democrats, okay? They love that slogan. What's even more interesting is as our bus was going, it was fully televised on NECN, the local NBC station, when our bus comes by, the cameras point it downward so we didn't get any coverage, okay? A third point here is the Boston Globe. When I was running as a Republican, 3 Republicans are featured in their article on who's running against Warren. Now, I was the first to announce, they know I'm out there. Well, the 2 of the 3 Republicans had not even announced, only one had, but they leave the darkie out of it. So I tweeted that out, against the Globe. Jim Sullivan was a writer saying, you left the darkie out. It went viral. Jim Sullivan calls me at home and he says, why did you call me a racist? I said, Jim, you're a racist. I said, what do you want me to say? You put 3 of the white guys in and you left me out because the Globe wants to control who's going to go up against Warren. And he said, oh, my intern forgot to put your picture. My point, I'm telling you this, we get in front, we win. I mean, it's 99% people say, Shiva, where have you been? These guys, literally people have said, these guys are the dirt, you're the sun. So the real issue here is, why is the media browning me out? A brownout. That's what's really going on. The Globe, and now you also have the racist right wing, which keeps the racist right wing talk show hosts in Boston, who keep control of the poor working class whites, because they love my message too. So we're in a we went to CPAC, which is a conservative, right? We bought our booth 2 months ago. We go in and they say, oh, you can't have your booth here. Anyway, we did it anyway. And after 2 days, they threw us out because we were, going against the establishment Republicans. So we get hit by the so-called left and the right because they're both one. Democrats and Republicans, are part of the same thing. They both profit from war and sickness. That's what they really do. And they've been taking advantage of the American people way too long. Now, Trump hit a dog whistle on that, right? On one.
Absolutely. Getting back to Indian mythology, is Trump, in your view, is he Kali or Shiva the destroyer, the chaos bringer? Is that his role, do you think, in all this?
Well, what I consider Trump is a necessary disruption, which can lead to people like me who can help destroy this nonsense. Right? Because if you look at, I look at it as system states. You have liquid, you have to boil it, it goes through a chaotic phase, and it goes to steam, right? So state transitions take place in a myriad of chaos. Trump has created, for whatever intention, it doesn't matter, frankly. He has created the necessary chaos that's needed to take the system to another level. And it has created essentially the gateway for, I mean, I never voted. First time I voted was for him because I saw him as an awesome disruptor.
Mm-hmm. I think many people did. He certainly seemed to talk to the wage earning class that had been thrown overboard with neoliberal policies like NAFTA, GATT, the WTO.
Yeah, all of these are policies to consolidate power. Elizabeth Warren hangs out with Wall Street people at Martha's Vineyard. These people are some of the most racist people that I've ever met. They're not even overtly racist. That's what makes them more insidious. They think they're so much better and smarter.
Well, Shiva, I really want to thank you for taking the time out to talk with us today. I know our viewers are going to be really excited to learn more about you, your campaign, but I think more importantly, your message. Again, I think you're offering this third way, this end run around this establishment that has been strangling us with neoliberals on one side and neocons on the other, and then they seem to come together in the version of some candidate that they throw in front of us and put a lot of money behind to win an election. So in closing, are there any key dates that people who might be watching this in Massachusetts need to be aware of, or do you have an upcoming event that someone can meet you at, and then how can they find you online?
Yeah, first of all, everyone should go to shivaforsenate.com, SHIVA4senate.com. We keep our website updated. My Twitter is V as in Victor A _Shiva, and you can find our Facebook over there. But the key thing is, we have an amazing technology infrastructure built, by the people.
I would imagine.
Yeah. So, and we did it on our own. And that's what we have. And now we're building our ground game. So anyone out there listening, you can help in two ways as a volunteer. You'll be shortly be able to go up, sign up, where if you want to make phone calls for us from out of state, you can do that. Very easy with a simple app, 10 minutes a day, make 10 calls a day for us to let people in Massachusetts know we're running. The second thing you can do is if you're in Massachusetts, you can sign up and help us volunteer in a number of ways to help make phone calls and distribute flyers, go to events with us. The other thing we're doing is we're doing real Indian tea parties or real Indian chai parties all over Massachusetts. You can host them or come to them, where we do them in intimate surroundings in people's homes. We're not up on a stage, bogus town halls that Elizabeth Warren does. We're doing it in people's homes, and we either take photos. We're going to be starting to tweet them out. So these are our things in people's homes across Massachusetts. So that's how people can participate. Obviously, the other way people can participate is give us lots of money, okay?
Right. It costs money to run a campaign. You need those resources.
Right. So if people have, whether you're 5, 10, whatever money, and you want to see real change, you should give it to us. We are running a campaign. We say only a real Indian can defeat the fake Indian. We're talking about real everyday people who are tired of the system. Our campaign is filled with people who are really warriors. These people have full-time jobs, and they give us a lot of their time because they're convinced that the message of our campaign to declare our independence, clean government, real health, health comes from real food, locally grown foods, real jobs, which is where people get skills. This is what we need. And it's not going to come from the deep state that Elizabeth Warren represents or the Republicans and Democrats. So frankly, my running, with all humility, is an opportunity for everyone listening. I don't have to do this. I have a biotech company that's worth a couple of $1 billion. I love doing my medical research. This is something I do because I feel compelled to do it, because I have such a anger towards the elites and the deep state, who basically are strangling people across the world and have essentially destroyed the American worker, destroyed meritocracy, and they're attempting to destroy rule of law. And that's how they prosper. And we have an opportunity with someone like me to change that and inspire others. So ShivaForSenate.com.
ShivaForSenate.com. Dr. Shiva Ayyadurai, I really appreciate your being here today. I wish you the best of luck in your campaign. And I would like to think that we'll be talking between now and Election Day again.
Yeah, and just remember, only a real Indian can defeat a fake Indian.
Have a great day, sir.
Thank you.